start recording this session here. You have any questions from Monday? Okay. There's a couple of things that we're going to spend some time doing today, which will include, excuse me, will include discussing the classification of drugs called antis, but we're also going to talk about a project that is to be done by the end of the third week, which is a drug class presentation in which you will pick a class of drugs, and I will give you a handout on the thing, plus an example, which does not mean that you have to follow that example. It's just the way one person chose to handle this particular project at one point. So, and that is that we know that drugs are grouped into classes. And the classes can be of a number of different types, but from a medical standpoint, the only kind of class that makes sense is based on what the drug does to the body, based on its pharmacodynamics. What system does it affect? Such as antihypertensives, drugs that lower blood pressure, obviously, or antibiotics, drugs that treat bacterial infection. Go right ahead. It seems to be one of those days, because I've been sneezing ever since I walked in the door, which is not normal for me. So, but we're going to choose, we're going to talk about those. You've already chosen your LRA case and the ADME project, the pharmacokinetic project case. And now we're going to look at a drug class. And as I say, I have a list of those and you can make a choice. So we'll give Sarai a moment to get back. Yeah, they ought to be quieting down since class theoretically should have started. So, but that particular group can get a little rowdy sometimes. So, as I started to say, drugs are grouped into different classes based on what they do to the body. Some of these are based on mechanisms, and there are also subclasses. We know with antibiotics, you've seen the antibiotic chart. So you've seen several different kinds of antibiotic. The different classes are based on essentially their chemical structure. And that chemical structure actually then is related to the specific kinds of microorganisms that they are most effective at suppressing, at killing. In the same way I mentioned antihypertensives, there are different classes of antihypertensives. There are at least 5 different strategies that we can use for lowering blood pressure. The first line for most people with mild hypertension is to check and see if they are retaining water, if they're showing signs of edema. Usually this is done by looking at especially the left lower leg and ankle. Why the left? That's the side of the body the heart is on. So what we do is we look at that. Tissue should not be soft and squishy in terms of feeling like it's like a water balloon. It should be relatively firm. Now, people who are overweight will have soft tissue, but when people have edema, what happens is we can actually push on the edematous tissue. And depending on the depth to which we can actually push down before we reach bone. And we're looking at areas over bony areas like the ankle. We push down on the ankle or the lower shin. And when we release, we look first off, how deep did we go? And second off, how long does that depression last? And so we can class edema based on those two parameters. And mild edema is something that, many of us have at various times. If you eat a very salty meal, you're going to retain a little bit of water for a little while because salt holds water in the body. But that should resolve itself over the next few hours as your body processes that salt and excretes it through the urine. It's when it remains, when it's something that we see long term, meaning you see it every single day, no matter what. So our first line of therapy, often for patients like that, is to give them, bless you, is to give them a diuretic. So that's one of the classes of antihypertensives. Diuretics, water pills, induce the kidney to process fluid a lot faster. And since blood pressure is measured as a function of a couple of different things, one of them is simply our fluid volume in our plasma. We have more fluid, we have higher blood pressure. Shock, which is a term I'm sure you've heard. Shock is actually something that happens when the blood pressure drops below a sustainable level. We move into shock, and what happens then when the blood pressure drops, often this happens from traumatic injury and blood loss. Then the heart starts working harder and faster to try and circulate blood to the body and give oxygen to the tissues. And shock, if it's not corrected, go ahead.
Sorry, I was hoping that wasn't me.
A problem?
No, they just called me twice. Somebody called you twice.
If you know them.
I don't know them. I don't have your phone.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been getting solicitation calls. And first off, they don't leave messages. Well, that's a sure sign that I don't want to talk to them because they obviously don't want me to know who they are. But the other thing, a weird thing happened to me recently in that I got a phone call and it was from a number that I didn't know, but these people had called me about 4 times in 2 days. So I finally said, okay, I'm just going to tell them to quit. So I dialed the number and a woman answered. And the way she answered made me think, this is weird. And so I said, I just got a call from this number. And she was quiet for a second and said, I haven't called anybody. And obviously then she looked and to see what my number was. She said, I haven't called your number at all. I haven't called anybody today. So we had a little talk, and I find, she was a little suspicious at first. That's reasonable. But after we talked for a minute, I said, well, somebody has been calling me about 4 times in the last 2 days. And this is the number that shows up on my screen. Somebody is hijacking your number somehow to try and make solicitation calls to me. She was still a little leery, and I said, you probably want to talk to your carrier and see if there's anything that can be done because, I've called. The next person that they try this on might not be as polite as I am, and you don't want to get calls like this. And so at the end of the conversation, she was very much more relaxed, and she agreed that maybe she needed to talk to her carrier. So I haven't heard from that number again. But I've been getting calls from a different number. And then my wife got a phone call, and she called it back, and the message was, this number is not in service. They're solicitors. There's some sort of method that they can mimic a phone number. And personally, I think that's fraud. But I'm not sure that it would meet the legal definition of fraud, because what they're trying to do is if you get a call from a business number you don't know, an 800 or an 888 or whatever number, are you going to return the call? Probably not. Especially if they don't leave a message. I sort of figure if they need to talk to me, if someone like one of my credit cards saying I've got an alert on the card, they're going to leave a message. So if they don't leave a message, that's a real clue that you don't want to talk. And lately, I've been getting calls that instead of a number, or they'll list the number, and then the name that they attach to it is scam likely. Yeah. At that point, I am not returning that call because I think that the systems are finding where people are actually using, I suspect, numbers that are not in service rather than real numbers. But my wife has had several of those, so have I. And it's really weird. So we have to be careful. It's really a shame we have to be careful these days, because people are just stealing all of our information. And I wonder how many people get calls from my number. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't called your number. I don't even know who you are. Yeah, right. But now I know, at least I can say, well, look, this is what may be happening. And we can help other people learn from those. Okay, so let's talk some more about this drug class assignment. So I'm going to first off, okay. So what you are is, there's a list on the second page of the various classes of drugs that you can choose from. And I have an example from a class that is not on the list, so it'll give you an idea. But what you're looking for is about a 5-ish minute presentation about a class of drugs. And what you want is, is down here, the following information, which is to define the class, explain what the words in that class mean. Anti, of course, means against, but an also means against. So if you have a drug that's an analgesic, algesia is pain, analgesia is against pain. So you want to take the word apart. All of these drugs, these classes will be structured in a way that says what they do. Common endings. Remember in 208, I gave you a sheet of paper that had common drug class endings. For instance, the class of penicillin antibiotics is a class with probably 10 or 15 drugs that are used in the United States, and even more that are used elsewhere in the world, that all end in "cillin," and that tells you exactly what the drug is. You see that, you know it's an antibiotic. What you don't know is, without knowing more about the specific drug, is it specific for certain organisms, or is it oral versus injectable? The original penicillin had to be injected. Come in. You're just perfectly on time, Cheyenne. we're talking this project, which we do the last, due for presentation on the last Monday of class. So, talking about drug classes. So what you'll do, we'll go through this list and you'll pick a class of drugs. So we're going to go through this entire list here, give some examples, trade and generic names. Be aware that there are subcategories. Antibiotics, there are lots of them. Your whole antibiotic chart is full of the subcategories of antibiotics. I was just talking about antihypertensives. There are about 5 different classes of drugs that are used to treat hypertension, starting with diuretics, and then moving sort of up the chain of series of drugs that would be used if the diuretics are not controlling the blood pressure. In some cases, diuretics are all people need, and they're fortunate because they're relatively benign drugs. But each of the different classes of antihypertensives has a different biological mechanism because blood pressure control is a very complex process and has many components. So some people will be on to control their blood pressure. Some people may be on every single class of antihypertensive. So you'll see people taking 5 or more drugs just to control their blood pressure. And when their blood pressure requires that, often they also have congestive heart failure, which is another set of drugs, etc. So it's a complicated system. So what you want to do is look at these. Do they overlap with any other class? Some of them do. NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, are antipyretics. They lower fever. They're anti-inflammatory drugs, and they're analgesics. By the way, just as an aside, I just didn't hear the entire report, but there was supposed to be a report yesterday on the local NPR station, Colorado Public Radio, of a study, the first real study to assess long-term pain relief by opioids versus ibuprofen, acetaminophen, aspirin, and the ibuprofen, acetaminophen, and aspirin are better for long-term pain control. So this is the first real comparison study that's been done. So we are learning more. When we talk about pain management later, I'll see if I can get some more information about that. So that's pretty recent. So the other thing, obviously, the what the drugs treat, diseases, conditions, symptoms, whatever. Many drugs will only treat symptoms, not underlying causes. A typical example is using ibuprofen for reducing fever. That's a symptom, or actually a sign, because we can measure it exactly. But it is, but it doesn't get to whatever the underlying cause of the fever is. What we use them for is to keep our body temperature below about 102 degrees, because above that we start getting into a range that is actually very dangerous. And temperatures above 102 should be treated, because when you get up to 102, it's more likely to start going higher. And then you run into the potential for febrile seizures, fever-related seizures, and and enzymatic changes in the brain as the brain is heated up to too high a temperature that can lead to death. So, but below 102, I very much am in favor of not using these drugs. And although I know from our own experience that when you have a child running a fever of 101.5, they're pretty cranky. And what you want to do is try to help them feel better. But there's a reason that the body raises its temperature when you have a viral or bacterial infection, and that's because the body is fighting the infection. If you interfere with that process, you're going to make the whole therapy for the infection longer and possibly more difficult. So that's something that doctors are starting to now realize too. As I say, I know perfectly well how cranky a child is when they're running a fever. It is no fun. But it's better for them to just have the fever for a while. Okay. While this is the presentation is really going to be a PowerPoint, which we'll look at. You can either do the PowerPoint just in PowerPoint, or you can use the PowerPoint presentation software known as Prezi.com. I don't know if any of you have used Prezi or not. It's pretty good. It gives you good tools. It makes use of all the features of PowerPoint that automatically, as opposed to having to jump through the hoops that PowerPoint wants you to. So you can use Prezi if you want. If you don't, then I don't care about that either. You'll do a PowerPoint, short, just a few slides, and if you want to use something other than Prezi, that's fine. There's a line here at the bottom. I'd like you to put your hand out in doc sharing. No, don't. Go ahead and just submit it. It'll be when it goes in. It will appear in week 3 for the points that are gonna for the grade that applies to the presentation. There will be a submission box. So don't use the drug class handouts. Don't try using doc sharing. Now, if you turn to page 2, there's a list. Okay. So I want each of you to pick one of these classes of drugs. So who wants to make the first choice? I'll give you a couple of minutes to look over the list because it's about 15 long. 18.
Is it on the
Second page, page 2, on the back of that first page. So on the back of the first page.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I generally try to do these things. When I give you a handout, I generally try to make them 2-sided just to save paper. Okay. Okay.
Can I take antivirals?
Antivirals. Antidepressants. Okay. Okay. Those are actually pretty good topics. I'll be interested very much in what you learn. Okay, and once again, it's actually due at the end of week 3, so Sunday night of the the 25th of March. Since you also have your LRA due at the same time, make sure that you don't get yourself behind on getting the work done, so I'd start soon. All of you have chosen topics that have a lot of information, so you may want to get started. The object here is for you to become the class expert in this class of drugs, and you will actually teach the rest of us about them. It'll be an interactive presentation, meaning that I expect people to ask questions. If I have questions, I definitely won't hesitate, so that's what I'm interested in seeing on this. We also have a grading rubric at the on page 3. So the grading rubric has a lot of will give you the breakdown of what points are applied to what section of the paper, and if you decide you have to leave a section out, then note that why you have done so. In some cases, it may be that you can't find any information. Please try to find that information, because in most cases, all of this information is going to be there. But sometimes you may find some of these sections are hard to, that you simply can't find information because it doesn't exist. Note that, so that I know you've actually investigated that particular topic. Okay? Now, let's take a look at an example. And this is a list that's not actually on, or a class that's not actually on the list, antiarrhythmics. This is the way one person chose to make this presentation. It's pretty complicated, obviously. I don't expect that that everything you do will look like this. This is only an example of what one person did, and then how they presented it. So in this case, they're talking about the various kinds of drugs, antiarrhythmics. Arrhythmia is an irregular heartbeat, and arrhythmia can be a whole series of different kinds of conditions. Arrhythmia can be a non-normal heartbeat. Have any of you taken Med 103, the ECG pulmonary? Okay, it's where you did EKGs on each other. You haven't done that? Okay. So when we measure the heartbeat, a normal heartbeat has a very specific rhythm and a very specific trace on an ECG or EKG. An arrhythmia is basically an abnormal trace. And that arrhythmia can be a suppression of some or another of the actual signals that we measure, or it can be a fast heartbeat, or it can be a slow heartbeat. It can be a totally irregular heartbeat. We have all sorts of different kinds of heart functions that fall into the arrhythmia definition. So there are several different drugs that can be used. When you're actually making your presentation, when you list a drug, we have here The first one on this is adrenergic blockers and beta blockers that inhibit the sympathetic receptors in our nervous system, and a couple of examples. These are definitely not the only beta blockers. There's a whole family of these things. You don't need to list every single drug. If you want to, that's fine. Sometimes you won't have any trouble finding them. But we have atenolol, which has the brand name Tenormin, and propranolol, which was marketed under the brand name Inderal. No longer is that brand name being used, by the way. Propranolol has been off patent for 30 years. So 20 years. So so the company no longer uses that trade name because they can't get any, it's all generic drug. But they have other uses. And if you can name the uses, that's fine. Sometimes those uses are going to be all over the place. So just note that they have. Same with calcium channel blockers. They've actually listed here angina and hypertension. So I can tell you right now, you go down the list, and what's not listed here is the non-antiarrhythmic uses of digoxin, which also is used for congestive heart failure and to regulate heart function. So there are a number of different drugs here that are listed. And you can explain here, the person has actually explained some of the different kinds of arrhythmias. We have sinus bradycardia. Bradycardia, brady means slow heart, slow heartbeat. So, and then you'd use, the drug of choice would be IV atropine. So this chart here really is a good summary of the topic. So they list all of these things out. This chart probably wasn't created by the person who actually put this together. It was probably copied from another source. If you copy something from another source, reference it. Perfectly legitimate to copy these things, but please reference it, because these are actually mostly copyrighted materials. So this does not give us a reference for this. Now, I don't know what the written report looked like for antiarrhythmics, but nonetheless, we have this different kind of this diagram here should have been referenced somewhere. But it's a very, very good explanation. It's complex. If you study it carefully, however, you'll learn a lot about antiarrhythmics. Okay. So, questions? Okay.
These are under week 3.
It will be under week 3. It's not there yet. I will get it in there today. So you'll see it as an 80-point assignment in week 3. But I wanted you to get started on it now, because it can be a pretty good project. And I think you'll find it interesting once you start diving into it.
And then the cases for the LRN.
Mm-hmm. They're also due at the end of week 3. Okay. So again, you've got 2 different projects to work on.
And then, but LRA says you will be given a case study with patients subjective.
Mm-hmm. That's the one you chose Monday. You chose the respiratory case.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. That's the case study. Right. So that's the one you're working on. And I will probably put in a a document here that has choices for LRA, ADME assignment, and the drug class assignment. So I'll put that in so that everybody has a list of what everyone's doing. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about, let's start talking about the drugs that we call anti. And I'm gonna, again, I have handouts for you. We'll get started on that before we take our first break. Okay. The term anti here is a term that unfortunately is applied broadly. We have antihistamines, we have antipyretics, we have anti-arrhythmics, we have antihypertensive. All anti means is against. In terms of antibiotics, as opposed to antivirals or most antifungals in the arena, antibiotics are some of the few drugs that actually get to the root cause of the problem. Most drugs, unfortunately, are used to treat symptoms, and we believe that if we can reduce the symptoms, and this is the case especially with antiarrhythmics, which we talked about, if we can reduce those symptoms, we can help the heart remain healthy. But we're not actually curing the disease, we're only controlling it with drugs. With antibiotics, and specifically antibiotics, we're talking about drugs that treat bacterial infections. One of the few classes of drugs that actually cures, that actually gets to the root cause. Root cause of the infection is obviously a microorganism, a bacterium. And the drug will actually usually kill the bacterium. Now, because of the nature of life, there's no way to kill all of the specific bacteria in your body, an infectious organism. Let's just say you have diphtheria, which is a bacterial disease. We can give you drugs to suppress it. We can give you vaccines to boost your immune system. But if you're not vaccinated and you get diphtheria, we can give you drugs to help reduce, kill most of the population. What these drugs do, rather than actually kill off all microorganisms of that type in the body, is reduce the load of microorganisms so that the body's natural defenses, the adaptive immune system, can take over and kill off the remainder of the organism. The immune system is a very complicated system. It probably is one of the most complex in the body. About 500 genes of our genome are involved in the immune system. The immune system has several different components. One of them is what we call the first line of our defense, which is essentially our body systems that keep things from getting in. So our skin is part of our first line of defense. Obviously, we're talking about intact skin. If you're cut, your skin isn't intact. Okay? So intact skin, our mucosal membranes, in our nose and other
parts of our body that actually entrap organisms and help us expel them before they can get into the body. That's part of it. Our second line of defense is a little more complicated. There are some cells, specialized cells, macrophages, and so forth, that will chase out, that will engulf invaders, kill them at a certain level. There is the body's response. We talked about fever, inflammation. Inflammation is a localized tissue temperature elevation. Generally, you probably noticed it affects yourself, and it gets red and a little swollen and warm. That is inflammation. That's the body's mechanism of fighting whatever they've gotten in. And the body gets ramped up real fast for that. The next part of that is fever. Fever is a generalized elevation of the body. And this happens when the infectious organism moves past that point of entry and gets more involved in the body. So these are, and pain. Pain is a warning. We learned early on that one of the ways to keep from getting sick after a minor injury was to clean it. And that was probably, that idea probably came to our ancestral people by watching animals. If you look at a dog, for instance, the dog touches the ball. What does it do? It licks it, it cleans it, and it keeps licking it until it stops bleeding and it's starting to heal.
When it's a paper cut, a lot of blood comes out.
Yeah.
So he comes over like to try to lick her or whatever. He's trying to clean it, but it's not like.
Yeah. Yeah, dogs, dogs are fine for themselves because whatever we don't necessarily have it.
Yeah.
But that's how we learn. It's like living animals. So we learned that one of the best for minor injuries, and then the last part of that second line, because in reality we have a third line, which is and the immune system is extremely complex. It's regulated by T cells and B cells, and we take advantage of it. We have both passive and active immune system. Passive immune system are what we give, what you mothers pass on to your babies when they're born, because what you've done is the babies are exposed in utero, and what you do is you generate antibodies, which you generate antibodies, and those antibodies will go to the fetus as well. And when they're born, not only that, you keep secreting in antibodies. But these are very short-lived because the body isn't and we will use these. If you have, for instance, what do we give you? We give you anti-venom because your body is not the antibodies on their own. That we used to with hepatitis B. We used to when a nurse or a doctor or a doctor would have a shot in we would assume that the patient might be ill. This is part of the always assume first that the patient has something that's not wrong. And so nurses would go down and of antihepatitis and and I'm told by my nurse it was one shot, and they would have to stand uncomfortable. They were the happiest people on the planet. But we used to use these treatments. We still do. I mean, because as I said, snake bite is antivenom. A black widow spider bite, black widow antivenom. And we have these for these rare exposures. Vaccines are generally given for things that are relatively easily contracted in relatively time. Whereas antivenom is for the less common things that we don't want. There's a wonderful story. There's a story about a researcher at the University of Arizona. He was researching rattlesnakes. When you research rattlesnakes, you go out in the field, the odds of you getting bitten are fairly good. Rattlesnakes will run away generally, but if they feel trapped, they'll bite. And so that's why if you're someplace and you're running into a rattlesnake, your best defense is quickly back off. Because as soon as you're out of their area that they're concerned about, but rattlesnakes, he would go out into the desert. When I was in college in New Mexico, we had a mountain we lived in high pond. It was infested with rattlesnakes. You were almost certain. So we knew we had a lot of rattlesnakes. We never had a problem with people. But this guy went out and he would harvest rattlesnakes, and he started giving himself a little doses to try and build up an immunity to where he could be bitten by rattlesnakes. And he would do it regularly, and he would have fever and a few other things. He would recover without problems. Rattlesnake venom is so it's nasty stuff. But it's not like neurotoxin. But one day he apparently a snake barely got him. Just a very, very small. What happened is a huge allergic, a huge, and that's what happened. A little bitty toxin and a huge response, and it killed him. So our immune system is our friend, usually. But in this case, it wasn't. The immune system has immunity, and it has the passive immunity that is to the passive immunity from giving venom shots or infection is passive passive immunity. The active side, the body learns antibodies, and the only way the body learns how to make antibodies, which are great big globular and be active. It's about when the body learns how to make antibodies, it stores it in memory cells that'll actually find it. How do we get exposed? Well, throughout history, well, we got exposed by getting and if we survive, which often was not We would originally when they had slaves, the people that survived the plague in the city, the next they didn't understand why. It was more observation than anything else. But then the immune system gets sick or through the strategy of vaccine. We give a small dose to the body and teach it how to make it. That's why that's why if you've had vaccine measles, you won't see. Now they will wear off. Mount very often. So things that we're not we have to do. But the whole purpose of drugs is to reduce population to the point that the body okay. So let's yeah, we're about 5 minutes late. Let's take our first break.
We'll resume this. We're going to talk now about antibiotics, anti-infectives in general. The class of anti-infective include antibiotics, which are effective against bacteria only. Antivirals, effective against viruses only. We'll just do a quick review of the various classes of microorganisms. Antifungals and antiparasitic, basically protozoal. So let's just do a quick review of the classes of antibiotics. And of microorganisms in general. You all had microbiology, so you should have been exposed to this before. But there are the classes of microorganisms are bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and viruses. And I'll put algae down here as in parenthesis because there aren't too many diseases that are and we'll just leave those out. There's also the class of organisms known as bacteria that have no known human pathology. So bacteria are really kind of grouped into a whole group of different things. We have, besides the regular bacteria, we have rickettsia. And rickettsia are bacteria that cannot live outside a host organism. They're spread, the most common that we know around here, rickettsial disease, is Rocky Mountain spotted fever. It's a tick-borne disease. Typhus is a rickettsial disease. And so we have rickettsia, we have mycobacteria, the most common mycobacterial disease is tuberculosis. And then we have mycoplasma.
Mycoplasma are small organisms that are technically part of the bacterial family. They have no cell wall, they cause certain forms of pneumonia. The most common form that we've seen recently with has been pneumocystic pneumonia, which most of us are exposed to or immune to, unless, of course, our immune systems are compromised through AIDS or through disease, and then we see pneumocystic pneumonia appear. So, but the family of bacteria is also split up, can be further classified for the major bacteria. If you look at the structure of a bacterium, then it is a little bubble, a cell wall, and we'll talk about two different kinds of cell walls, enclosing a cavity that's filled with a gel-like fluid called cytoplasm. And in that cytoplasm, you're going to find the DNA in a coil, but not in a nucleus. Remember, when in our own bodies,
We're just looking for a security box in here, not in here, doesn't look like. Thank you.
you're welcome. There is no nuclear membrane, so the DNA in the bacterium is just out in the cytoplasm as a large coil. Also in the cytoplasm, you'll find several families of ribosomes. Ribosomes make proteins based on the code in the DNA. There's also RNA and other things, obviously, for the transfer of that information. The cell wall in bacteria is really divided into two different families, one of which the cell wall is composed of several membranes. One of these membranes is a complex called peptidoglycan. It's basically peptides and sugar molecules forming a matrix. Okay, and there's two layers of that. And then in the other form, the peptidoglycan has a slightly different overall structure, and there's only two layers. The bacterium has an outer layer, an outer coat as well, that's composed of the usual cholesterol and fatty acids and molecules that we call portals that transfer molecules that allow things in and out of the cell. There is a process that you did. You all took Med 104, so you have done a Gram stain, right? So you know the Gram stain, either you get a dark blue-black stain, or you get something that's more like a rose pink color. The blue-black is Gram positive, and Gram has nothing to do with the weight measure. Gram was actually the name of the Danish microbiologist that invented this staining process. So we have, and the others are Gram negative. In general, Gram negative are they're harder. So with the tears, rock, and fire. Again, fire are the in terms of our um, um, there are other and then there are stronger broad both that gives us a different view. Gives us a little graphic that helps understand what's going on. If we take a look at this graphic, we take a look at this graphic here, you can access it through the shell as well, but I find it easier to look at when holding a copy in my hand. Came off of a website that really describes. We've got a couple of different bacteria here. One is a rod. One at the bottom is a rod, a bacillus, and the other is a coccus, a spore at the top. As we have here, we have the DNA in the cytoplasm. We have the ribosomes, those little dark dots, with strands of RNA going through them for the synthesis of protein. Okay? So different antibiotics will affect these organisms by different mechanisms. The penicillins mess up the ability of the microorganism to synthesize the peptidoglycan component of their cell wall. If the cell wall can't form, then the bacterium is killed. Some things actually punch holes in that peptidoglycan layer, and in the entire layer of the membrane that surrounds the cell, obviously killing the cell at that time. Different of these things will affect different subunits of the ribosome. The ribosome is actually not just a single structure. It's a structure that has a number of subunits assigned to it, and different antibiotics will affect different subunits of the ribosome. The effect is the same. It disrupts protein synthesis, therefore the cell dies. The broader spectrum on the right side of the diagram here will give us a number of different methods of bacteriostatic or bactericidal action. One of them is to again inhibit protein synthesis. Others will mess up the ability of the cell to make peptidoglycan layer. Another one is messing up the ability of DNA to be opened, to be copied. So for protein synthesis, so we basically stop the ability of the DNA to be read and anything done with it. Others will become involved in other metabolic processes like sulfonamides, especially trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, which is Bactrim or Septra. Some of you may have had that for urinary infection. What they do is they mess up the ability of the cell to actually make DNA by destroying its ability to create thymidine, which is one of the components of DNA. Others work by actually cutting up DNA. They actually damage it and they make it impossible for it to work. If we look on this list on the right of this page, they're increasingly potent antibiotics, going from tetracyclines down through the carbapenems to the metronidazole. Flagyl is a particularly nasty drug. It is really more of a drug that is aimed at anaerobic bacteria. Remember, bacteria are classed also as anaerobes or aerobes, meaning anaerobes will grow in an oxygen environment, and anaerobes require an environment that does not have pH. Okay, most common anaerobe we think of is Clostridium tetani. But also a major problem in hospitals and nursing homes is another member of the Clostridium difficile, known as C. diff. And it's an anaerobe, and it's treated with flagyl. And the treatment course can last up to 30 days. And flagyl is one nasty player in the antibiotic. So we like to use that as little as possible. So we are looking at our choice of antibiotics is really dictated by our knowledge of what the infectious organism is. And how do we get that knowledge? Well, we need to know how to diagnose specific kinds of infections, and there are plenty of methods of doing so. We also need to know what is the community at the time. One of the things that is done is infectious diseases were the first focus really of the Center for Disease Control. And what they did was work on developing protocols for treating infectious diseases. Therefore, we have a lot of information about what drugs treat what kinds of organisms. But to specifically identify an infectious organism is a lengthy process. It means going through a number of tests. When you did your microbiology, remember you did the experiment where you looked at susceptibility, the little bitty test. That's one test you can do. The problem is that these things take at least 48 hours to get a result. By that time, the patient is either very sick or dead. So what we have to do is make a best guess. And so many doctors will be observing as what's going through the community. So you go to your doctor, and they get the publications in the CDC, the morbidity and mortality report, and they and in that the CDC is providing information collected from doctor feedback about what kinds of diseases are being seen in various parts of the country, because they're regional to some extent. So what they do is they will say, if your patient presents with this set of symptoms, it might be this organism. This is the recommended treatment, which is why you might go to the doctor with an infection and get a drug, and then maybe a couple of months later, you go back to the doctor with what seems to you to be the same thing, because you have the same symptoms. The doctor might give you an entirely different drug because it's a different bug that's in the community at the time. All they can do is guess. Since we don't have time to do a full workup, and some organisms are extremely difficult to culture and therefore even identify, what doctors have to do is take a guess. And so many of them will use broad spectrum antibiotics, unless it's something that is known to be susceptible to simpler drugs like amoxicillin. You know, your kid goes in with an ear infection. Well, ear infections are usually secondary to something else. And doctors know this. So that's why the first line of an ear infection is treatment is always um, amoxicillin these days. Amoxicillin because it's an oral penicillin. We don't have to infect it. It's also cheap and it works. That's also why you're told if the child doesn't get better in 3 days, call it because then it's wrong. That's how we deal with these because we just don't have the time to the luxury of the time to let the patient suffer for at least a couple of days before we have any chance of making a decision. So we'll give these antibiotics based on the doctor's experience and on the patient. This is also why it's important for you to know if you have any allergies to any of these antibiotics. Many of us are allergic to things like penicillin and sulfur. Okay? So antibiotics were basically unknown. Infectious disease has probably killed more people on the planet than anything else in the history of the human race. And it wasn't until the 1930s that we had penicillin. 1928 was when Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. And it was basically a laboratory curiosity because he could only make a little bit. It was discovered as an extract of bread mold through an accidental process in the lab. But bread mold is a lousy source of penicillin. It took World War II to stimulate research on finding ways to make penicillin in large quantities. And the story goes that several companies were working on this, and they were just since they knew penicillin was created as came out of a mold, penicillin bread mold. They looked at members of the fungal family, because molds and yeast are part of the fungal family. So they looked at members of the fungal family, and the story is that a scientist was in a farmer's market in Indiana and found a moldy cantaloupe and bought it, figuring he'd just take it back to the lab and see if it would make penicillin. And it turned out to be the key to making large amounts of penicillin because it was very efficient. Pardon? That particular mold grew on a cantaloupe. And the original discovery was bread mold. So I used to tell my daughters, "Oh, don't worry about the mold on the bread. It's just penicillin on the bread." They didn't think that was very funny at all. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Tastes terrible. Yeah, sure.
Moldy bread.
Pardon?
Moldy bread.
Yeah. No, it should make you sick. Small amounts. If you ate large amounts of it, it might upset your stomach. But they've been getting antibiotics, small amounts. Yeah. Yeah. They've been getting small amounts of antibiotics. Yeah. So, and it's just cheese. I mean, how do we make cheese? Cheese. Well, but we use mold. Mold is what makes cheese fertile. And blue cheese is simply made by running copper wire. By running a copper wire through the cheese, and it would pick up whatever the blue is a copper cell. It's picked up. So but cheese is just mold. So that's why we don't eat moldy cheese in our house. But when we have dogs, they love it. And it probably helps keep them a little healthier. Yeah. Dogs will eat it. They love it. Pardon?
Dairy. That's what I've heard too.
It's, well, I mean, in large amounts. I mean, you wouldn't feed them a pound of cheese. But if you just cut the moldy part off the cheese and feed it.
I give
How old is he?
9 or 10.
Okay, that's part of the reason,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, well, you gotta take care of yourself. Right? So anyway, we have all of these different, we have, so antibiotics really came about, and you all heard in Pharmacy 200, you saw the video, Elixir of Death, and that was about sulfonamide, or sulfanilamide, rather, which was the first sulfa drug. And it wasn't the sulfanilamide that was harming the patient. It was the carrier, because sulfanilamide had to be infected as well. But it was the carrier, which was basically anything. And it basically led in that class, and food and drug administration. But those two drugs probably saved more lives than the other two, than we can even think about. War is a pretty messy thing, and infectious disease probably than than the enemy, whoever the enemy was. Depends on which side. But that's just antibiotics have been an interest ever since. A number of are actually sourced out of other microorganisms. So, but the antibiotics themselves have grown, and they became a problem when patients were given drugs that they shouldn't have been given, and and then for diseases that were not possible to treat with antibiotics. And we started having the problem of resistance organisms, and that's turning into a major issue. Questions? So we have the handout that I gave you. I'm going to there are many of these drugs, the penicillin, and then the next one, the cephalosporin, or cephalosporin, are similar to penicillin. So if you see penicillin, it's probably penicillin. There are several generations of cephalosporin that have been invented. Each one is a little more powerful. Each one has a different spectrum of activity. There that has been done to improve those. The sulfonamide interfere with something called para-immunogenic for folic acid, which actually vitamins, the drug itself have a certain level of and so we have the cycling, tetracycline, oxycycline, and so forth. These drugs are again made in microorganisms either slightly different available. Another class is glycoside. Amino refers to amino acids. Glycoside glycosides are sugar-like structures, and the aminoglycosides protein synthesis. The macrolides is another family. The erythromycin, the most. What they are, they're called macrolides, chemically very and again, they play around with the protein synthesis. We have, again, erythromycin itself is of a fungal and we have some similar drugs that are you know these as so we have then in recent back in the late 70s, series of molecules called quinolone, synthetic broad spectrum bacteria that enzyme called DNA isomers to the process of DNA replication. Mess around with that, and there's quite a few. They do have interactions with other. So our families are chosen um, for bacterial infection is pretty broad. And I've got another hand that has another list that sort of summarizes at least the cell wall inhibitors, those that interfere with
You like killing trees.
No, I don't. But sometimes.
I like to have papers.
Pardon?
I like to have papers.
Yeah, I prefer a little bit old school in that respect. Okay, so gonna move on now to fungal diseases. And let's see. Fungi can really be divided into yeasts and molds, both of which can cause problems. We all, certainly yeast infections. We also have other uses, brewery, obviously, also for leavening bread. To use if you have raised. Molds are another different kind of organism that is a little different from the yeast. We will go into different fungal infections. The relatively benign, like athlete's foot, to really as to really emanate immune compromise and a very, very highly, but there are a lot of different antifungal drugs. In order to get most of them are fungistatic. All they do is keep the fungus from continuing to spread. They don't actually kill it. There are a few fungicides that we have that are useful. The cells reproduce. Come in. Hey, Amanda. Welcome.
Hi, ladies. How are you?
Like that backpack. Yeah, here's Barclay. So we're gonna do some monthly updates real quick for all of you.
Okay.
If that's okay.
That's fine. Go right ahead.
Okay, okay.
Keeping you interested so far.
All right, what's some of the things that are going on? You will be hearing some noise possibly today, and within the next couple of weeks, we do our so that means they're going to be on the roof, they're going to be throwing wires, we're doing that. The other thing that they're going to be doing is once we get the new security system in, is we're going to be locking down the doors differently. So when that is completed, when you guys come to school, instead of coming through the double doors, there's that one single door by itself. That would be the entrance to the school. We're going in. Right? No, we didn't go that route. We may go that route. Depends on what we do. You know, the content of what we're going to do at this campus here. So if we get to that point, we have to. But right now, you just look at one door. When you leave, you have to go through the double door. Okay. And just for security purposes, we just don't let anybody in there. Okay. We never had a problem here, but we don't want to have a problem. Right? So that's how that will do. And then once we get the new security system in, the door is completed, we will do probably an active shooting with all the students, just so the staff and students kind of know what to do. Drill. We forgot the drill. So we're going to do a drill.
Thank you.
An active round.
Yeah.
Like I said, we've never had one out here before. Decent teams out here. So you got any questions about that?
All right, so we have two grads left off. That's super exciting. That's what we're here for. Those grads are Norris Reyes and Melanie Moore. And one student placed in I'm looking for a new work study, an additional work study. The work study position is about 20 hours a week to help run the Pearson View Testing Center and 12:30 to about 5:30 during Monday through Thursday. And it's a position here at the school. In addition to Pearson View, we help other departments and me doing my own things that I do around campus. And GPA requirement is 3.8. If you're interested, please come talk. And jam session. You guys know about the jam session? So we're changing them up a little bit. They're going to have it on Wednesday and Thursday now. There's going to be two instructors. One will sit in the library and help with coursework. One will go either into the lab or into the computer lab or work on skills. So those are Wednesday and Thursday. The daytime is still from 12:30 to 1:30, and evenings from 5 to 6. There is food or and snacks for those guys.
And the skills class doesn't have to be the current class we're in. If you want to do something different and get your skills, this is time to do it.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks, ladies. And
Thank you very much. The treatments for fungal infection can be short-term Usually what you have really severe, one or two topical treatments will suppress other kinds of infection, fungal infection, can take longer. We generally try to, there are some topical or local treatments. Treatments for like candidiasis, short-term application of at the location. Other major infections that we have are in patients. These infections can be quite lengthy to treat, up to a year, in fact, to treat, because the drugs are kind of static. In other words, all they do is stop the fungus from growing as long as you take the drug. If you stop it, come back and put it on again. As long as you take the drug. And then you just have to wait until the nail grows out and shoves the infection growing nail and so we're going to stop there right now for the second break of the morning, and we'll pick it up after. We'll switch over to antivirals now. Viruses are a very, very different form of microorganism. First off, they're very much smaller than bacteria. Bacteria tend to be measured in micrometer dimensions. Remember, a micrometer is a millionth of a meter, a thousandth of a millimeter. So they're very small. We didn't even know they existed until the end of the 17th century, when microscopes actually turned on things like pond water. And Van Leeuwenhoek, who was an amateur scientist at that time, most scientists were because people that could afford to spend science were mostly wealthy, either wealthy businessmen or royalty. He was a businessman in Holland who was a microscope builder at Harvard, and he started looking at pond water, and he saw these little things swimming around in them. They were probably protozoans, but nonetheless, that gave us the ability then to understand that there were a whole realm of living organisms that we couldn't see with our naked eye. Viruses are too small for the most part to see with a microscope. You need to have an electron microscope to be able to see viruses. Viruses also are very, very simple organisms. Viruses are really either DNA or RNA in a protein coat. And that's it. The way viruses work, remember from biology, they infect a cell, they attack DNA, make more copies of themselves. And then they get up to a certain number of copies and they destroy the cell. They eradic the cell that's there. Notice I didn't say just a human cell. Viruses affect plants, they affect animals, they affect bacteria, they affect fungus, In fact, if they can get into the cell and hijack it, they will. So it doesn't really matter what it is. The only other things that are there are enough enzymes to integrate into the cell, into the nucleus, if we're talking about nuclei. Cells that have nuclei are called eukaryotic cells. Cells that do not, like little cells, are prokaryotes. So you get into if you have to get into the DNA. So the virus has enzymes into the cell, into the nucleus, and taking over the process because they have none of their own. They also have enough DNA as well to structure the so that they fully form copies of themselves. Depending on the size of the virus, number of copies that it can can vary. We have viruses that are like a virus we call adenovirus, about a 20 nanometer. Now, a nanometer is 1,000th of a micrometer. So it's a billionth of a meter. So imagine. So in the wild, adenovirus about 100,000 copies of itself, and destroy the cell, lyse the cell, and then spread on others. This is how viruses actually kill. They kill by destroying the host cell, which seems kind of self-limiting, but viruses live and survive in the environment for millennia. So there's some argument in scientific circles, and I think this is a more philosophical argument. No, the viruses really aren't alive. Well, they can reproduce themselves even though they have to hijack the cell to do it. Those horizontal anyway, viruses will work by that. The problem is there are thousands and thousands of viruses. As I said, we have DNA viruses, we have RNA viruses. We have viruses that reproduce by first starting with copies of RNA and using that to make copies of DNA, virus, or one of the primary viruses that we know that is in this particular family. It's called a retrovirus, a reverse procedure for cells. So we have this is a very simple organism. We don't have ribozymes. We don't have organelles of any sort. All we have is a protein code. This isn't even a simple layer of glycan, bacteria. It's protein. Some viruses are what we call envelopes. They will have a lipid layer around the outside. But the key is that protein. And that protein can have many, many different shapes. Viruses have multiple different kinds of shapes. Some of them look like little rolled up hedgehogs, spiky balls. Others are linear. The Ebola virus is one of the largest of the viruses. It is about a micrometer long, about 1,000, just about 1,000 pounds. And it is a long, skinny virus. So viruses have a multitude of different protein structures that they can have.
Would you call that tube?
Rods really refer to bacteria, a tubular or long thin virus is really, not called a rod in virology. Viruses can also be rectangular. They can be all sorts of weird shapes and sizes. Um, they have viruses can be pixelized. This is one of the reasons we think it's not alive. They can be pixelized just like humans. And we can, if we do that, then we can do studies using photography to determine what this is. We've learned a lot over a long time. Viruses were really discovered late in the 19th century. And the first one that was really identified was called which is something that was a plague to the tobacco industry at the time, still is. We now have ways of dealing with it. Tobacco, I don't know what effect it had on the ability of people to actually use tobacco, but it was not a, it really disfigured tobacco. So that was the first one that was actually crystallized. Few the ability to and X-ray for looking at small structures. Viruses are very, very tough to treat. The best treatment for any virus is to try and treat the problem is that, again, it takes time to remove vaccines that we give now. Vaccines for things like shingles, hepatitis B, are meant to boost our immune system. Unlike bacteria, we don't have any spectrum of virus because each viral coat structure is different. And so getting, and if the virus itself is not absorbing anything from its environment, then it's hard to see how a drug is going to directly affect the virus. What we do, however, is interfere with the ability of that virus to actually integrate into cells, to move into the nuclei of eukaryotic, to integrate into the DNA, and or prevent the DNA that is attacked by the virus from actually. We have a growing list. Every year, more and more antivirals, especially are approved. There's a lot of work going on. Theoretical reason that we could have a broader spectrum kind of that we have, but we haven't seen those yet. In terms of the kinds of viruses, all antivirals usually have somewhere in the name, usually at the end, the suffix or the syllable VIR. So the herpes treatment, the first antiviral, the first really truly directed antiviral drug was the herpes treatment acyclovir. So VIR is so if you see a drug name with VIR at the end, it is an antiviral. Now, that doesn't tell us what kind of virus it attacks. We have to know what the target is. The major targets, as I say, recently have been hepatitis C, which is really kind of epidemic. Apparently, it's a really hidden epidemic. Recently, when I went in for some blood work, My doctor said, I'd like to test you for hepatitis C. And I said, why? I'm not, usually hepatitis C is associated with um, things like intravenous drug users. At least that was my thought. But apparently it has been appearing in large numbers of the population. And there is a very significant probability that anyone my age would actually have antibodies to hepatitis C, meaning that we'd have been exposed to it. Fortunately, the testing was negative for me. I expected it. But nonetheless, we are seeing that it's really much has penetrated into the population quite a bit more than we thought a few years ago. So, but we are seeing those. There are also researches on treatments for flu. We all know about flu vaccine, but if you get the flu, you have to take it. Well, these days they'll figure out Tamiflu or one of the other influenza for treatment of again, viruses, and what we want to do is get people's immune system. The problem is that our immune systems have a hard time with some targets. As I said, we use a lot of vaccines. We have vaccines. There are no general viral drugs, no viral vaccinations, and no general flu vaccine. All of these viruses are large families, all of which are specific viruses like hepatitis C, hepatitis B, and so forth are relatively small. We have vaccines for a number of the hepatitis. We have B for E, and maybe now for B. But Hep C has been to viral vaccine development. So that's why we're Hep C suppression. The problem with the hepatitis is hepatitis, the virus affects the liver. And even though there are hepatitis E, and we'll probably find more in the future, they're all very, very different viruses. So there is no such thing as a hepatitis vaccine or drug. There are specific drugs and different ones. This particular doctor was a couple years old. In the last couple of years, 4 or 5 new Hep C drugs. Hepatitis B research, basically, or drug research, has been removed by the Hep B vaccine, which is highly effective. It is recommended if you are working in the medical field that you have a hepatitis vaccine. Yeah. See, this I predate all this. Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah. And when our daughter, they weren't giving it. So I know my older daughter has had the vaccine because at that vaccine, the flu vaccine, where so she had to have it. We haven't had it. So they have, but the problem with hepatitis is that can lead to cirrhosis or liver cancer. And so that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons my doctor oh, yeah, trying to reduce and keep an eye on liver cancer. Fortunately, a fortunately, I'm able to. I don't have it. Hepatitis A is foodborne. That's why we hear about outbreaks. We do have a vaccine for it. And it's usually short, very few patients. So hepatitis B, you know that we have a few drugs. It's more of a problem. We do have a problem. The um, is a national. That's why we do have every year for the treatment. Let's see, that may be oh, you're doing antibiotics. Oh, yeah, you're doing antibiotics. No. Yeah, you're the president. Yeah, let me get what the new let's see. It's really the years ago we had that were developed not very effective or the again the first really major drug for treating viral infection was marketed and it really marked the time again, we can't do much more than and how the virus, many of the other antibiotics developed, the virus actually mimics the structure of nucleoside, which is only it's incapable once it's incorporated into the growing DNA chain, nothing can be added to it. The DNA of the nucleoside that are mixed and have places for the growing backbone nucleoside. So what happens acyclovir was it actually stopped the ability to grow a DNA molecule. We call these gene terminators, and they work that way. Stop the ability suppressing the virus. It actually kills the virus. It's already, the only way to kill a virus is to cell the virus. That's not a very at least the patient. So the way these work, so the herpes family, is very long time. Both herpes even blisters. It includes the varicella zoster virus, which causes chickenpox, and then is basically sequestered in the body. And then other times herpes zoster, which is shingles. So we don't know yet, since the chickenpox is relatively new, we don't really know if people who receive chickenpox are also shingles. We also have which I get mad about. So I have been resistant. You're putting something into the body, you know, if it's not needed, then there are risks. And I just haven't seen it. I may live to regret that. But so far I haven't. Okay? There are a number of since the virus, and they're all basically modifications. And acyclovir itself is way off patent. Lastly, I want to talk about as that is something that has been a major source of research. Again, our antiviral drugs that have been marketed are really every year there'll be new drugs for treatment and new drugs for TB. HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, works by destroying the T cells that really drive and they was really discovered because doctors started seeing certain places, Boston, other large cities, they started seeing a rise in very unusual diseases that they read about in medical school, but probably had never seen an active case. Diseases like apathy, diseases like pneumocystis, cryptosporidiosis. Most of us are exposed to these things regularly. Our immune system is and a relative to also, these had never been seen by most of the doctors, and they noticed that they seemed to be largely located or largely part of the men. When they started investigating that the patients were developing, they had very, very immune function. And it set off a big lot of research to identify the human immunodeficiency virus, originally called human virus. The HIV caused the suppression of immune system acquired immune syndrome, and was killing a lot of people. The approach that was made for the original was exactly the same as the approach to use gene terminal. And so what it does is which is a target. Unfortunately, it's also very, um, a very, but at the time it was approved, even though it's time it was approved, there was nothing. And so even though the drug itself is it beat the so it was approved. And what that did was lead to a lot of other which interfere with enzymes that are activated by we have um, um, we have inhibitors of the ability to integrate into DNA. We have a number of different because we are concerned, and we were concerned right away about resistance. Viruses too can become resistant to the drugs that treat them. We found that out by contact. We found this out by contact. Trying to induce resistance. He was able to do that. So this immediately set out the idea that way to treat this drug to do a combination. And this is not uncommon. We already know that we often combination hypertension. So we actually now are using that to treat HIV. Now we'll have up to 4 or 5. Some of these are combination drugs. In other words, there will be one pill that'll have 2 or 3 or even 4 different antibiotics in a fixed combination, all of which have been established previously. So all of this is HIV is viral infection generally made or generally measured by the number of active components that are in a cell. We elect to define a cure as being anytime that a patient is previously steroid, we can no longer detect that. And that's been the case with HIV. In recent years, a number of patients who have taken a therapy we call HART, highly active antiretroviral therapy. These are combinations of drugs. We've had several patients who have had the viral load, in other words, reduced to an undetectable level, effectively zero. Does that mean they're cured? We don't know yet. Because just because we can't detect the virus, we can't detect herpes zoster in the body. And yet we know that it's there because there's a shingle patient. So, but these patients are able now to lead a normal life. They have immune systems that once again so are they cured? Sounds like it to me, but will they stay cured? We don't know. Okay. But we do have now effective means of treating HIV. If you're working in a physician's office and you have an HIV patient, there's a couple of things to remember. First off, it's very difficult to transmit unless you have either sharing needles as intravenous drug users or you have very intimate in the doctor's office. But that's really what it takes. When AIDS was first being investigated, it scared the dickens out of people. People with an AIDS patient in the hospital, the kitchen staff would set their food tray on the floor outside the room and we'd call them there. They wouldn't even come into the room. And there were many medical personnel who, when they came in, they'd be wearing masks, gloves, being bunnied up, because we didn't know. Now that we've learned a lot of understand how difficult it is to actually transfer it, people have become a lot more comfortable dealing with AIDS patients, which is very important for the AIDS patient. Okay, questions about antiviral drugs? Where's it going? Well, there's a lot of research. Virology is a field that is being very highly researched at the moment. As I said, there are some few potential commonalities between large groups, between a number of viral families. As I said, there are a whole lot of many of them causing the same disease. For instance, common cold can be caused by a family known as rhinoviruses. Why do we call it that? Because we isolated it originally from the nose. Rhino means the nose. The coronaviruses, which were isolated from again from the nose, but are very different morphologically, meaning they look very different. They also behave very different. These are both part of what causes the cold. We have the flu. We have all sorts of things. We hear this every year. We've got H1N1. We've got H2N5. We've got all sorts of different families of viruses that cause the flu. Plus, we have flu A and flu B, each which can have a number of different causes. So there's a lot of research going on to see if there are any commonalities between the viruses that actually affect various tissues. There are some theoretical possibilities for using this approach, finding some broad spectrum antiviral drugs, meaning in this case not really a huge number, but several. There's a lot of research going on in vaccines for viral diseases. Obviously, a vaccine is going to require that you have an immune system that's active. So a vaccine to treat a virus that attacks the very system that we need to fight off the virus, HIV, since it attacks the T cells and destroys them. There are some real challenges. That's why we don't have a vaccine today. Because we have to activate the very cells that the virus. And if they're destroyed, how are we going to activate? So we also need to be worried about that. Hep C has been, for some reason, very resistant to vaccine development. And there are some explanations for it. It has to do with the fact that it's very hard to find something that the immune system can latch onto. The way the immune system works, antibodies are very, very specific, meaning they look for a very special shape that they attach to in order to attack and bring in other cells like to tear up the invader. So hepatitis C just doesn't seem to have something that our immune system can readily latch onto. which is why we don't have that. Yet. Does that mean we never will? I don't think so. But it certainly seems like a while. And the same with HIV. Is it impossible? I've been involved in at least 2 efforts to develop vaccines against AIDS. And all of them were very, very well thought out. As far as a good, solid scientific believing that they work. They haven't worked. They have none of the vaccine approaches have proven to be effective. Even though theoretically they should, but they haven't been. Okay, so let's take our last break, and we'll come back and talk about antiparasitic.
Okay, let's get started again.
I'd like to talk about antiparasitic. The antiparasitic, as a general class, include things like protozoa. Protozoa are large, complex, eukaryotic organisms that the word protozoa means early animal. Proto, early, zoa, animal. These are probably the first microorganisms. And they tend to be include some of the most widespread economically destructive in the world. And they don't tend to be a major factor in the States anymore, but they certainly affect a good portion of the world. Parasitic diseases also in most people's minds include things like helminths, which are worms, basically things like bloodworm and so forth. Ringworm, by the way, is not a worm. Ringworm. We talk about ringworm. We see it in our kids. They get it outside, and we get, oh, that's a worm. It isn't. There are, however, other internally dwelling worm species, and some really interesting stories about treatment of those things. The protozoal diseases include things like malaria, leishmaniasis, things like toxoplasmosis, cryptosporidiosis, amoeba-based disease, dysentery, amoebic dysentery, something that was really brought to the fore after two in various parts of the world, home, having been in the tropics, where they picked up amoebic dysentery. Dysentery is basically an intestinal disease, diarrhea, often diarrhea, very much nasty stuff. These days we see it more in Colorado. When I was in graduate school here in Colorado years ago, we used to occasionally take we'd go up into the mountains, find a place, buy a stream, and just camp for a couple of days. Water in the stream, no problem. When I returned to Colorado, all the streams are flooded, and you can no longer just take water out of the stream. which is too bad because. But we have, but Giardia is another. Treatments are for the ones we can treat, and lengthy because they're very hard to get to. Malaria is a mosquito-borne disease. Part of the problem with malaria is probably malaria was used as one of the diseases, probably not originally deliberately, to actually um, um, deal with and pull off the Plains Indian tribe, the Comanche, the Apache, the Sioux, the Arapaho, etc. Up here in the United States, probably covered by basically doing it accidentally, from the coastal areas. Malaria was a major problem in Europeans as well. Died from malaria still kills about 500,000. It's a disease that's amazing. The problem is the malaria, these parasites, go through a number of different stages of development. They live in various different cells and at different stages of they cause problems. But ultimately, because they're so variable, anti-malarial drugs, my father was in the Pacific War and was taking anti-malarial drug and apparently protected him. But malaria has been being attacked by drugs for a while. Currently, the only drug that is effective is a drug called Lysine, and apparently it has really nasty side effects, really graphic, horrible. It doesn't work, but we are looking at trying to find. There's also a big effort to find a vaccine malaria. We know how to get somebody to say, well, we finally have a vaccine. Because it's basically diseases. Leishmaniasis is probably a disease that you're not familiar with. It's a tropical disease. Or live in the abdomen. Very common tropical throughout Central Africa. Leishmaniasis. And lately, I actually saw a couple of years ago a drug that was actually developed to the European disease that was in those areas. It was only seen in developed like there was a time when Merck was actually selling a drug that was used for different in this country. It would take the supplies of drugs tire, and send them off to Africa. Street light training or reasons. Unfortunately, a group of people found out happening was workers using that and running it off. But a lot of people then choose areas and so who lost? The very people that should have been being helped. One of the some of my friends who were the drug itself was, all right, so there's a 5-year shelf life. That's not a scientific number. It is a legal number. The drug itself is that their opposition and they're recruiting more. But that drug for sure. It's really bad. The drug that can be used for treating a lot of lymphocytitis is metronidazole is very, very drug that if you were taking, there's another good average because the drug itself is that. That is the only thing that is effective. And we're talking about a 6-month course, not a short course, because it's so the can also be used for treating amoeba type diseases. Giardia is actually Giardia infection as a form of dysentery. Bloody bloating the treatment of these things is fortunately the diseases are not common. They also have you probably the warning. When my wife was pregnant, I got to cat ready. It was I'm not so, but it was something important for it. So anyway, another part of parasite besides helminths, and they're difficult to do. Nasty drugs for treating things like worms, but we also have external parasites like babies, like head lice and that sort of thing. And we have treatments for that as well. For many, many years, the only treatment for babies was a drug that unfortunately and so there you are, your kids have head lice, and you're putting kerosene on their head. Well, kerosene is flammable, right? It burns. And, despite warnings, people would put stuff on their dry their children And occasionally, hair would actually because they're electrical and sparks, and it would set them fire. So quill is probably not, should probably never be used. We have another product from it was marketed. It was actually, and it is delivered in delivered as basically a premium. Wash your children's hair on there and let it stay. And what this does is it's a much superior product because um, the effect is consistent. It will actually kill not just the adult head lice and babies, but it will kill the eggs and the larval form. It's very effective. Very consistent product. So if your kids ever have head lice, go down to the drugstore and use it. Works perfectly well for that. Again, I work for the company. What we did, and we lived in North Carolina, they're either inside fence or outside fence. If they go back and forth, we will have a house. And after bombing our house, which was not nice. We like the bomb. And cats too. But what we did with the dog, I would go outside and the dog, mix on them, rub it in, and just leave it there. We never had it. One time a year. And it's for the fleas and ticks. It's not on the label, but we did it anyway. So we have ways of dealing with these technically mites and babies and helminths, microorganisms. We can actually see them with our naked eye. Mites and babies are difficult to see because they can really have to know what you're looking for to be able to find them. But they fall into sort of a treatments that we have treatments that sort of fell out of microbiology. Nobody knows what. I mean, babies and mice are insects. They're awful. So that's one thing that we don't do that because insecticides actually are also dangerous to human beings. In fact, the nerve gases that were Nazi extermination camp in World War II actually came out of insecticides, but they were very effective at people. In our handout, we also have a section on antihistamines. This doesn't seem to make sense when we're talking about microorganisms. But antihistamines are used a lot of times in treating disease because the process of inducing disease often generates histamine in response to the allergen, the microorganism or irritant, which causes allergic reaction in large amounts of a anaphylactic reaction. So sometimes people are a runny nose or other types of The so we have a number of different antihistamines. Obvious, the original one that everybody knows about is Benadryl. That's available over the counter now. The drug wasn't considered safe enough. But we also have the treatment for nausea and vomiting, also is a Dramamine of Benadryl. The problem with most of the antihistamines is that they're also induce drowsiness. And so if you take an antihistamine, now we have cetirizine, which is Zyrtec and other sort of late Claritin that are new antihistamines that are not the sedative effect, the drowsiness effect. I've never taken any. I don't take antihistamines ever. But I'm told by people in here that they do have it's just that it takes that more. So there's lots of uses for those kinds of drugs. We sometimes do take them when we have a bacterial infection. Help us with the symptoms. Okay, questions? Okay, so there's a lot of information here that you will find useful in the assignments that you're working. So I'm going to leave that with you. I want to take a quick look. It's now just after afternoon. What I might do is just run back to my desk and get a couple of things. But before I do, in the week one, there is a list of 13 videos. Some of them have to do with the antibiotics and some have to do with the pharmacokinetics. They're generally relatively short videos, but they're also excellent sources of information. So you should go ahead and look at those. The ones I've looked at have actually been pretty good. I haven't looked at them all myself, at least not recently. Most of these I've seen in the past. But go ahead and look at those videos as part of your study for the class. Remember, we have a discussion this week. It's called hybrid discussion. Hybrid merely means you're going to do part of it online. Okay. So we have a discussion for the week. It has to do with the ADME process, pharmacokinetics. Remember, you're supposed to pick one part of that ADME and study that and give some information about it. We have the antibiotic comparison chart, which I gave you on Monday. It's due at the end of this week as well. You have a quiz. There is a note here in the homework and assessments about an in-class quiz over Monday's content. We don't have that in this show, so don't worry about that. You have the ADME assignment, And again, as I said before, start thinking about the drug classification. So questions about any of that? Okay. So what I'm going to do is run back my desk and pick up something that you'll get started on, that you need to do, that'll be part of next week's work. In fact, I'd like you to look at it and figure out how you're going to do that. I'll be right back.
Have you guys done the quiz for the class? Have you? Have you? I was just wondering how it was.
So another bunch of dead trees. We're going to talk about this. Right. All right. Next week, week 2, we will be talking about some cardiovascular issues as well as dermatology. We're going to be looking at cardiology and cardiovascular. The last week I told you that infectious disease drugs, treatments for infectious disease, probably the largest single block of not necessarily any drug as the largest, but as a single block, the largest group of written. Probably the second largest block, cardiovascular. Because cardiovascular disease is a major problem. So what we're going to be doing is looking at that. Meanwhile, we're going to be studying something called the Framingham study. Decades ago, a long-term prospective study. Prospective means a study that's going into the future, collecting data today for future analysis. And the purpose of this was to look at the relationship between cholesterol, smoking, blood pressure, and cardiovascular. And it would be stratified by age and this was started a long time ago in the city of Framingham, Massachusetts, and it has been it's a way to use a small number of parameters to calculate or estimate the risk of heart disease based on lifestyle. Okay. This has been going on for decades. The amount of data that has been stimulating the training and study is daunting. But it's been very useful because it's an important tool that cardiologists use to assess the risk of heart disease, heart attack, death related from either of those. And over a period of 10 years, or within a period of time, to look at it. I mean, again, we're looking at a large amount of data. As I said, teaching as well. And what we do in there is look at a large sample population, large enough sample that generalizes a broader population, and make estimates, predictions, and of broad predictions about what can happen in the future. None of these predictions can be said to be accurate for a single individual, but for a population as a whole, we can pretty much predict the rate based on some of these data. So the issue is that what we want to do is actually assess family members for someone you know based on their smoking history, their age, their cholesterol level, and if you don't know some of the information, but if someone doesn't have any idea there may be someone amazing don't. So what we want you to do is go and get the information from the family member. But remember a few things. So we collect these data, and I want you to think about who you're going to talk with. Collect the data for the person. And what you want is age. Okay, you need their age. You need their total cholesterol. You need their age and smoking status. And if they have cholesterol, you want to look at the HDL, high density lipoprotein. Okay. What you want to do there is also blood pressure. You all know how to take blood pressure. Okay. And then calculate a score. Okay. Calculate a score based on that the numbers that you have. Okay. So that makes sense. Looks like I made, yeah. I've got what you want to do is collect these data on the second and third page. The second and third page are two identical pages. One for you, and one for a friend or family. Okay, and then you will be preparing their risk. Remember, a risk is not predicted; it is only a risk. Okay, if you have someone with a score that is, say, here. A score of 11. The 10-year risk is 8%. That they're going to in the next 10 years. Not for the individual. It does mean that people have had heart disease or heart attack in that. It also doesn't mean that 10 years from now, sometime in the 10 years is when we the heart attack. So don't so don't take these as indicators. What many doctors do. Okay, your cholesterol. Try to get your cholesterol. I'll go where. Like get your cholesterol. We all know that. But maybe. It used to be when I was. So fortunately, most doctors don't. But let's keep it low. Because we also relate, as I said, and I don't trust they're not your best. Okay. So questions? I note we have two different sections. One is for women and the other for men. And almost all for different levels. Now remember, this is an assessment. It's widely used. In terms of helping people. So what we want in here is the actual assignment is to just to do this, so we'll leave it at that. Questions? Okay. So next week, we, as I said, we will be cardiovascular, respiratory, dermatology. There are also a series of videos that are mainly cardiology and respiratory. I have posted Monday's Zoom session, and we'll post days as well if you want to go back. That's about it for today. So if you want to stay here and work a few more minutes until class is over, that's fine. I'm going to stay here and work on a couple of things. So unless you have any other questions, we'll call the class.